I can still remember standing at my mom's front door that night, my hand practically trembling as I reached for the bell. And it's only been a week, but the memory is still so sharp it almost hurts. Like a fresh bruise you keep touching, even though you know you shouldn't. Dylan was right beside me, tall, put together, looking every bit the man I wanted the world to see him as. And in that moment, his presence felt like a shield and a weight at the same time. Comforting because I thought I wasn't alone, but heavy because I wanted so badly for him to be perfect in her eyes. I had fussed with my hair in the reflection of his car window on the way over, trying to smooth out every flyaway, telling myself to breathe deep, like one of those guided meditation apps I never stuck with. And underneath all that, I was just a girl who wanted her mom's approval more than she'd ever admit. I kept thinking, this is it. This is the turning point. Tonight, my worlds collide. My mom finally meets the man I believe is my future, and if she smiles the right way, if she likes him, maybe I'll finally feel grown, maybe I'll finally feel sure. When I lifted my hand toward the doorbell, Dylan caught it gently and pressed it himself, the way you might guide a child across the street. And I felt this strange mix of gratitude and embarrassment, like I wasn't trusted to handle even that tiny gesture. Then the door swung open, and there was Mom, still in her house sweater, not yet realizing who stood on her porch, her face lighting up when she saw me, and then flickering with curiosity when her eyes landed on him. For a second no one moved, like we were frozen in a family photo that hadn't decided yet if it would be framed or ripped up, and the silence was thick enough I could hear my own pulse echoing in my ears. Dylan, usually so confident, actually hesitated, his smile a little tighter than usual, and Mom, my warm, quick-witted mom, seemed at a loss for words. It was just a few heartbeats of awkwardness, but I swear I felt them stretch forever. And then, like the spell breaking, I rushed in with, "Mom, this is Dylan, the one I told you about," my voice a little higher than I meant, and Dylan followed up quickly with his polite, "Good evening." Mom stepped back finally, murmuring something like, come in, both of you." And I exhaled without realizing I had been holding my breath. I thought, maybe this is how beginnings are supposed to feel, messy and tender, hopeful and uneasy all at once. We ended up in my mom's kitchen, the same kitchen I'd grown up in, the one that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and laundry soap, and she had a fresh pot of tea on the table and a warm apple pie sitting there, golden and inviting. But nobody touched it because the air was too thick with nerves and expectation. I remember sliding onto the chair so close to Dylan that our shoulders touched, and I leaned into him like he was my anchor. Though in hindsight, it feels more like I was clinging to a raft in waters I didn't yet realize were dangerous. Mom started the conversation the way she always does, soft and thoughtful, asking about his job, what he liked to do outside of work, the kind of small talk that for her wasn't small at all, because she was always listening for the truth tucked between the words. Dylan, of course, was flawless, his voice steady, his posture straight, his hands folded just so on the table like he'd practiced in a mirror. He talked about the importance of family, of building a strong foundation, of being practical and careful with money, and I kept nodding like a bobblehead, soaking up his every syllable, convinced I was watching my future unfold right there in front of me. Then Mom asked about the future, our future. And that's when something shifted. Dylan turned his head, first to me and then back to her, and with that little smile he used when he wanted to seem charming but in control, he said, "What matters most is keeping everything under control, because then happiness and stability are guaranteed." Those were his exact words, and at the time I thought they sounded responsible, almost admirable. But there was a chill in the way he said it, something mechanical, like life was a spreadsheet to be managed, not something to be lived. I didn't notice it then because I was too busy filling the spaces between his pauses, jumping in with details, finishing his sentences, eager to prove we were in sync, desperate to smooth out any edges so Mom would see us as seamless, perfect. I can still see myself there, leaning toward him with stars in my eyes, ignoring the little knot of unease in my stomach, the one I dismissed as nothing more than nerves. It's strange to look back and realize that sometimes your body knows the truth before your heart is ready to face it. I remember how hard I tried to keep that evening picture perfect, as if the right smile, the right word, the right posture could convince my mom to love him the way I did. And for a while I thought it had worked, because she laughed at his stories, offered him pie, and listened with that polite tilt of her head she always had with my boyfriends. We didn't stay long, just about an hour, because Dylan had already planned for us to catch a late movie, and he was never one to bend schedules. He slipped out first, heading to the car with that confident stride of his, and I lingered in the hallway, not quite ready to leave, needing that last embrace from my mom. I kissed her cheek, breathing in the faint smell of her lavender lotion, and whispered with my heart pounding, "So, Mom, what do you think? He's good, right?" And the pause that followed felt like a lifetime. She smoothed her hand over mine, her smile faltering just enough for me to see it wasn't real, and she let out this long breath before saying quietly, almost like she hated the words herself, "Sweetheart, he's not the one for you." I swear in that moment it was like the floor shifted under me, because I had been so sure she would see what I saw, that glow I thought he carried, that promise I thought he held. Later that night, we sat in her kitchen the way we always did, 2 mugs of chamomile tea on the table, her apple pie half eaten between us, and for once there was no easy chatter filling the air. The silence was thick, heavy with all the words I wanted to pull out of her. Finally, I cracked, my voice sharper than I meant, asking why she said that, why she couldn't see how educated, how attentive, how thoughtful he was. I listed his good qualities like I was reading a resume, desperate to make her change her mind, but she just sat there, her eyes soft with that deep sadness I'd seen only a handful of times in my life. She reached for my hand again, her voice low and almost apologetic, telling me she couldn't explain it, only that she felt something off in him, a chill she couldn't shake, something her heart recognized, even if her head couldn't name it. She said it with such certainty that I felt a rush of heat rise to my cheeks, part anger, part shame, because all I could hear was that she was trying to shatter the dream I had built. I snapped back that he was just serious, that not everyone was playful and light, and as I said it, my throat tightened because a part of me, one I refused to acknowledge, already knew what she meant by that coldness. When Mom told me that night that a mother's heart rarely makes mistakes, I felt like she had poured cold water over all my hopes, and the way she said it, soft but so certain, cut deeper than if she had raised her voice. She looked past me when she spoke, her eyes drifting to some place I couldn't reach, and she whispered that this wasn't the life I had dreamed of, that I needed to slow down, that some choices couldn't be undone once they were made. I should have heard the love in those words, the warning tucked inside them, but all I felt was anger swelling up in my chest, like she had dismissed everything I believed about myself and about him. I snapped back at her, insisting I knew exactly what I was doing, that I was old enough to make my own decisions, my voice shaking, not because I doubted myself, but because I was terrified she might be right. I remember pushing my chair back so suddenly it scraped against the floor, standing there with my fists tight at my sides and throwing out that sharp line, that tomorrow we were driving out to meet Dylan's parents and everything was going to be perfect, just wait and see. I wanted to prove her wrong so badly, to make her swallow her words, that I barely noticed how her smile faltered, how it curved into something closer to sorrow than disagreement. I stormed off, slamming my bedroom door like a teenager, not like the grown woman I thought I was, and left her alone in that kitchen with a half-eaten pie and a heart that must have weighed 1,000 pounds. I can still see her in my mind's eye, sitting quietly at the table with her hands wrapped around her mug, staring at the crumbs as if they held the answer she couldn't give me. And maybe they did, because when I picture it now, I think she already knew exactly where my choices would lead. The next morning broke bright and warm, sunshine flooding my window as if the world was trying to reassure me that everything would be fine, and I let it. I pushed down her words, shoved her worry into a locked box inside me because I wasn't ready to carry it. I brushed my hair, put on my best dress, smiled at my reflection like nothing was wrong, and told myself that today was going to be beautiful, that all of Mom's doubts would vanish once she saw how good Dylan's family was. I wanted so desperately to believe that love could be proven, that happiness could be arranged, that if I held my head high enough, no one would notice the cracks already forming beneath my feet. That morning, I woke up with this hard knot of determination sitting in my chest, the kind that makes you stand a little taller even if your knees are weak, and I told myself over and over that I was going to prove my mother wrong, that Dylan really was the man I wanted to spend my life with. I brushed my hair until it shone, dabbed on a little makeup, nothing heavy, just enough to feel polished, and when I stepped outside, he was already there, leaning against his car, his arms folded in that casual, self-assured way. The kind of pose that looked effortless, but always made me feel like he was on display. His face lit up when he saw me, or maybe it was just the sun catching his smile, and for a moment I felt lighter, like maybe the day was already on my side. We pulled out of the neighborhood and left the city behind, and I remember how the late summer sun drenched everything in gold, the fields along the highway swaying with ripe wheat, the endless blue sky pressing down like a promise. I tried to let the beauty settle me, to quiet the doubts that had crept in after that talk with Mom, and I pictured us walking through some perfect garden, laughing with his parents, proving to myself that I wasn't naive, proving to her that she'd been too quick to judge. Dylan drove steady, one hand on the wheel, his posture relaxed, and for long stretches we didn't speak at all. But then he turned his head slightly, that half-smile tugging at his mouth, the one that never quite reached his eyes, and he said almost casually, "Listen, Grace, my folks, they're particular. Everything has to be just so. You'll see." His tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't light either, more like instructions before a test. I laughed softly to hide the twist in my stomach, thinking it was just nerves, but he went on, slower now, making sure I absorbed every word. "Just stick to the walkways, all right? Don't step off into the grass, don't pick fruit unless they hand it to you. That's how things are at our place." I nodded, maybe too quickly, telling myself it was nothing, just quirks of older parents, just little rules that made their home their sanctuary. But there was something about the way he said it, with that careful smile and that edge of warning underneath, that left me quiet for the rest of the drive. I stared out at the fields blurring past, willing myself to think only of the good things ahead. But I can still remember how my palms dampened against my lap, and how I kept pressing them into my dress as if I could iron out the unease already starting to crease my heart. I laughed a little when Dylan warned me about not stepping on the grass or picking fruit off the trees, because it sounded almost sweet, like the kind of old-fashioned fussiness you expect from older folks who've worked their whole lives for a perfect lawn, and I nodded quickly, wanting him to see that I could play by their rules. In my family, things were so much looser. Kids running barefoot, neighbors dropping by unannounced, my mom never caring if the hedge was trimmed or the dishes matched. So his parents' everything-in-order way of living struck me as almost charming. I thought, well, maybe this is what it means to marry into a family that's successful, careful, proper. At 25, I still believed strictness could be a sign of stability. When we turned off the main road onto a dirt driveway and the car rolled to a stop in front of these massive wrought iron gates, I felt my breath catch. Behind them stretched a garden that looked like something out of a magazine, every stone in the walkway set perfectly in place, the grass cut to the same exact height as if someone had measured each blade. There wasn't a single leaf out of place, not one speck of disorder. The house itself was framed with flowers, every color carefully arranged, nothing random or wild, and instead of feeling welcomed, I felt like I had stepped into a photograph. Glossy, beautiful, but somehow unreal. As we pulled through the gates, I pressed my palms against my knees to keep them steady, because everything about the place whispered, "Don't mess this up, don't breathe too loud, don't be the one thing that breaks the picture." My stomach flipped as I saw them waiting for us. His dad near the shed, tall and straight-backed, his arms moving with the kind of purpose that made me sit up straighter, just watching him, and his mom bent over her flowers, her bright blouse catching the sun, her movements neat and practiced, like she'd done this same routine every day for years. The moment our car came to a stop, they both turned toward us, setting aside what they were doing and walking over in unison, not rushing, not hesitating, just perfectly timed, as if they had rehearsed our arrival. It should have felt welcoming, but instead I had that odd sensation of being inspected, as though the gates had closed behind me and I was stepping into a place where everything would be measured, including me. When we stepped out of the car, they were already waiting, and the sight of them is burned into my mind, even now. His father stood tall, shoulders square, the kind of man who didn't have to speak to let you know he expected to be listened to, his eyes sharp and assessing in a way that made me straighten my back before I even realized I was doing it. His mother was the opposite in her manner, rounder, softer in appearance, with a smile plastered so wide across her face it almost seemed rehearsed. She bubbled with words from the very first moment, her voice high and sing-songy, the kind that fills every empty space so you don't get a chance to notice the silence underneath. They came at us with open arms, hugging me, showering us with warm greetings, and on the surface, it looked like kindness, the kind of generous hospitality you'd hope for when meeting future in-laws. But I remember standing there stiff in her embrace, realizing that while her lips curled into a smile and her voice sparkled with welcome, I didn't feel any heat in it, not the kind that warms your chest. It was polished, precise, practiced, as though I'd stepped into a play where everyone knew their lines except me. I remembered Dylan's warning about the rules. Stay on the paths, don't touch what isn't offered. So I placed my feet carefully on the stone walkways, conscious of every step, as though even brushing against the grass might expose me as unworthy. The gardens were immaculate, the flower beds exploding in color, but instead of marveling freely, I felt myself admiring cautiously, like a guest in a museum where the wrong move sets off alarms. The air smelled of roses and freshly cut grass, but beneath it, there was that same chill I'd felt in Dylan's words earlier in the car, a reminder that perfection often comes at a price. While Dylan and his father hauled a massive wooden table under an apple tree, his mother darted in and out of the house with dishes that looked like they belonged in a magazine spread, crisp vegetables, layered salads, pastries that gleamed with glaze, platters of roast meat still steaming. I offered to help, almost eager for something to do with my hands, but she waved me off with that smile stretched even tighter across her face, insisting that I was a guest, and guests weren't to be put to work. The way she said it sounded sweet enough, but there was a sharp edge beneath, as if I had overstepped by even asking. I sat there in that flawless garden, watching the scene unfold, wondering if maybe my mom had been right all along to sense something colder than I was willing to admit. His mother's voice floated toward me in that overly sweet, practiced tone as she urged me to go with Dylan and admire the roses. I smiled politely, though inside it felt more like being dismissed than welcomed. Dylan tugged my hand, and I followed, trying to ignore the sting of embarrassment as I leaned toward the roses, which were so perfectly pruned they looked almost artificial, their scent faint and distant. That's when I heard it, a hesitant knock at the gate, soft but urgent. His father's head turned sharply, his expression tightening in a way that made me instinctively hold my breath. Behind the iron bars stood a man in his 40s, shifting nervously, his cap twisting in his hands. In a careful voice, he explained that he'd had car trouble, that he just needed a little help to get back on the road. It was the kind of simple human request my mom would have answered with kindness 100 times without hesitation. For a heartbeat, I expected the same here. But before his father could reply, his mother gave a short, dismissive laugh, waving off the man's words without even looking at him. She said something about how everyone ought to be prepared, about not relying on neighbors, her tone sharp enough to sting. The casualness of it unsettled me. Not anger, not even irritation, just a cold refusal wrapped in a smile. Then his father walked over slowly, each step deliberate, and told the man in a voice so calm it was chilling that he should leave, that he was interrupting their evening. I watched the neighbor's shoulders slump, his eyes falling to the ground as he muttered something I couldn't catch, before he turned and walked away down the road, smaller with every step. A shiver ran across my back despite the warm air, and for the first time I felt a real crack in the picture-perfect surface of that place. I wanted to ask Dylan if this was normal, if this was how his family always treated people, but before I could speak, he gave me that thin smile, squeezed my hand lightly, and guided me further into the garden toward the gazebo wrapped in ivy, as though nothing had happened at all. I kept telling myself not to read too much into it, that maybe they simply valued order, that perhaps it was just their way of drawing boundaries, but the image of that neighbor's slumped shoulders lingered in my mind like a shadow. It was unsettling, the way kindness had been dismissed so easily, as though generosity had no place in their perfectly arranged world. We took our seats at a heavy wooden table set under the branches of an old apple tree, and the sight of it nearly overwhelmed me. Platters of bright salads, loaves of bread still warm, cuts of roasted meat glistening in the fading light, rows of vegetables that looked almost too perfect to eat. His father spoke with great pride, his hands moving in wide gestures as he urged me to taste the cucumbers and tomatoes, repeating that every bite came from their own hard work, untouched by anything artificial. Yet the way he said it didn't feel like simple pride. It carried an edge, as if the meal itself was a statement of control, proof that nothing in their lives existed without being claimed, cultivated, and managed. His mother moved quickly around us, her bright smile never dimming as she poured glasses of cold apple cider and carefully placed portions of salad and meat on our plates. She chimed in with practiced ease, nodding toward her husband, reminding me that they had built this life on their own, that they never relied on anyone, and then she added, with a tone that felt rehearsed, that Dylan was the best catch around, that I would be wise to hold on tight, because joining their family meant gaining respect from everyone. Her words hung in the air like both a compliment and a caution, and I found myself smiling politely, though my chest tightened. Dylan stayed quiet beside me, smiling faintly, but letting them hold the stage, and now and then I caught his glance sliding toward me, not warm, not tender, but almost evaluative, like he was measuring how well I was performing. It unsettled me, but I quickly dismissed the thought, telling myself maybe his family just showed affection differently, that maybe this was their way of proving love. So I forced myself to compliment the food, to marvel at the order in their garden, to nod at their stories. But deep inside, where I couldn't quite silence it, there was this unease. Everything felt too polished, too rehearsed, too rigid to be real. Maybe it was just the cool breeze slipping through the orchard, or maybe it was my mother's warning echoing in the back of my mind, whispering that she had sensed a coldness in Dylan from the start. I told myself I was being dramatic, that I was letting her doubts creep into me. But still, I gripped the edge of the table too tightly, my fingers pressed hard into the wood as if I needed something solid to hold me steady against a feeling I couldn't name. And then it happened. His father's fork hit the plate with a sharp clatter, the sound cutting through the evening like a crack of thunder. His whole posture shifted, his back straight, his face tightening into something I hadn't seen before. The warmth he had worn like a mask just seconds earlier slipped away, replaced by a look so hard and intent it made my stomach turn. His eyes fixed on something at the far end of the garden, and without a word to anyone else, he pushed his chair back so suddenly it scraped across the stones. Before I could even process what was happening, he was on his feet, moving faster than I expected for a man his age. He crossed the garden with long strides, his jaw set, and on his way he reached for a long wooden stick leaning neatly against the side of the house, as though it belonged there, waiting for this very moment. I froze. My fork hovered uselessly in my hand, a piece of salad slipping back into the bowl. I looked toward Dylan, then toward his mother, expecting surprise, confusion, any reaction at all. But there was nothing. She calmly served herself another spoonful of potatoes, and Dylan kept chewing as if the world around him hadn't shifted at all. The disconnect was dizzying, like I had slipped into a dream where everyone else knew their roles except me. My skin prickled, My heart hammered so loudly I thought the whole table must hear it, and still I sat there, paralyzed, my mind scrambling to understand a scene that made no sense. Then I heard it, faint at first, like a squeak carried on the wind, and then a muffled sob that made every muscle in my body tense. My head snapped toward the sound, and for the first time that evening, even Dylan paused, his eyes shifting briefly to the trees, though his face remained unsettlingly blank. A moment later, his father appeared from the shadows, and the sight made my stomach lurch. With one hand, he clutched a boy by the arm, dragging him forward with a grip that looked unshakable. The child couldn't have been more than 10, his face pale and frightened, his eyes wide and brimming with tears as he stumbled to keep up. Time seemed to slow. The boy's sneakers scuffed against the stone path, his small frame straining against the pull, and I felt my throat close as though the air had thickened around me. Every instinct in me screamed that something was terribly wrong, that I had to do something, anything, but I sat paralyzed, my body betraying me, my mind caught between disbelief and horror. That was the first moment I felt it fully, that splitting clarity that I was staring straight into the real heart of this family, and that I had stepped into something much darker than I had ever imagined. His father's expression twisted into a grim smile as he pulled the boy closer to the table, his voice loud and cutting as he called him a thief. The child shrank in on himself, clutching at his pocket as if it could shield him. But with a rough shake, a few pieces of fruit slipped free and fell to the ground, rolling across the stones and coming to rest beneath the table. The soft thud of them landing seemed deafening in that silence, and with each one I felt my stomach sink deeper, as though the air itself had turned heavy with shame. That's when his mother, who up until then had been so politely composed, suddenly lit up in a way that made my skin crawl. Her smile stretched wider, far too wide, and she turned to Dylan with a sing-song in her voice, calling his name as though she were handing him a gift. She told him this was his moment, that as the future head of the family, he needed to prove himself, to show how things were handled when someone dared to cross their boundaries. She said it like a ritual, a test, her words laced with pride, as though cruelty could somehow be disguised as tradition. And Dylan, oh God, Dylan, he rose instantly, as if he had been waiting for this cue. The look on his face chilled me, a cold arrogance, a sharpness I had never seen in him before, as though stepping into that role gave him a dark satisfaction. He moved toward the boy, who was already trembling, his small frame bent with fear, and instead of offering comfort, Dylan leaned in close, his voice low and edged with threat, telling him to remember what happens to those who take what doesn't belong to them. The boy's frightened cry pierced the garden, thin and broken, and something inside me shattered with it. This wasn't discipline, this wasn't even anger, it was humiliation, a display of dominance over someone completely powerless. I looked at Dylan, then at his parents, searching desperately for a flicker of restraint, of compassion, but all I saw was approval, even delight. Their eyes burned with a kind of greedy pride, a satisfaction that made my stomach twist. In that moment, the masks they had worn, the perfect host, the doting family, the polished charm, slipped away entirely, and what remained underneath was raw, merciless, and deeply, deeply wrong. Something inside me snapped then, like a dam giving way. My chair scraped loudly against the stone as I pushed myself to my feet, my whole body shaking but my voice suddenly clear and strong. I shouted that it was wrong, that I would never allow such cruelty to continue in front of me, that no one, least of all a child, deserved to be treated as if their only purpose was to be broken down. My words tumbled out, fueled by a fury I had never known in myself before, and for once the garden went silent. All their eyes were on me, Dylan's, his mother's, his father's, each of their expressions hardening, twisting with shock, even outrage that I had dared to break the unspoken rules of their little kingdom. But I didn't flinch. I looked straight at Dylan, the man I had once believed I could love, and I told him with every ounce of conviction in my soul that I would not, could not, ever marry someone who saw suffering and felt nothing. The boy, as if sensing his chance, darted behind me, pressing himself into the folds of my dress like I was his last safe place. Without waiting for anyone's response, I took his hand firmly and walked us both toward the gate, each step heavier but surer than the last. I could hear his father's voice booming in confusion, his mother's tone dripping with scorn as she told Dylan to let me go, that I would regret this and come crawling back. But I didn't look behind me. The iron gates creaked as I pulled them open, the air outside rushing cool against my burning cheeks. And as we stepped onto the dirt road, the boy's grip tight in my hand, I knew I had not only freed him from that nightmare of a garden, I had freed myself too. Something inside me gave way, like a rope that had been stretched to its limit and finally snapped. I looked at Dylan, the man I had once defended so fiercely to my mother, and all I could see was how naturally he belonged in this family that could find satisfaction in another person's humiliation. It wasn't about discipline, it wasn't about order. It was something far darker, a sickness wrapped in the disguise of virtue. My stomach churned, my hands trembled, and a fierce heat rose up through me, burning in my throat until it had to come out. My voice broke at first, but with every word it grew steadier, louder, until it cut through the garden like a blade. I told them exactly what I saw, that this wasn't teaching, this wasn't correction, it was cruelty for its own sake. They weren't guiding, they were feeding on suffering, and the truth of it spilled out of me in a rush I couldn't hold back. When Dylan turned to me, our eyes locking across the table, I saw it plain for the first time. The cold calculation behind his charm, the same cruelty that pulsed through his parents now shining openly in him. The polite mask he wore for the world was gone, stripped away in an instant, and what stared back at me was something hard and unfeeling. The realization jolted me so violently that I scraped my chair back without even knowing I was moving. My whole body shook, but my words rang clear and sharp. I shouted that it was wrong, that no child should ever be treated this way, and then I said the words I hadn't known until that second I was capable of saying, that if Dylan could stand there and be part of this, then one day he could do the same to my own children, and I would never, ever bind my life to a man capable of such cruelty. For the first time that day their faces shifted, shock, fury, disbelief, as though they couldn't comprehend that the quiet, agreeable girl at their table had suddenly defied them. The silence hung thick, broken only by the boy's desperate movement as he pulled himself free and darted toward me, clinging to my side like I was the only safe place left. Without hesitation, I took his hand, small and trembling, in mine, and with my heart pounding like a drum, I led us toward the gate. My steps were heavy but steady, and for the first time that afternoon, I felt sure of one thing. I was done. Behind me came his father's bark, sharp and angry, demanding to know where I thought I was going, followed by his mother's cutting sneer, dripping with scorn as she told Dylan that I would come crawling back, that I'd regret walking away. But I didn't turn around. I only tightened my grip on the boy's hand and pushed open those heavy iron gates. When we stepped onto the dirt road outside, the air rushed into my lungs so sharply it almost burned, as if I'd been holding my breath the entire time I'd been trapped inside their perfect garden. I crouched down so that I could meet the boy's eyes. His cheeks were streaked with tears, his lashes still damp, and I spoke softly, gently, telling him that taking what isn't his could bring him more trouble than he realized, and that he had been fortunate this time. His wide eyes blinked at me, frightened but grateful, and in a whisper he promised he understood. I gave his shoulder the lightest touch, urging him to run along home, and I watched him dash down the road, his small frame shrinking with every step until he disappeared around the bend. And there I stood, alone now, outside that immaculate but poisoned place, the iron gates closed behind me. I realized that in helping him escape, I had also freed myself, not just from that garden, but from a future I wanted no part of. I remember standing outside those iron gates, my hands trembling so badly I could hardly steady my breath, realizing I didn't even know where I was anymore. Behind me, the garden looked like a glossy picture torn from a magazine, beautiful, perfect, but belonging to someone else's life. In front of me stretched only a quiet country road. I turned slowly, searching for a sign of direction, and finally spotted a small street marker nailed to a post a little ways down. With fingers that shook, I dug my phone out of my purse and ordered a ride. Sitting there on the gravel shoulder, the dust clinging to my shoes, the weight of it all pressed down on me, and for the first time that entire day I allowed myself to sob, the tears rushing hot and unstoppable. By the time I made it home, the sky had already shifted into deep shades of purple and blue, the porch light glowing like a beacon. Mom stood waiting in the doorway, her arms folded across her chest, but the instant her eyes met mine, she dropped everything and wrapped me up. I collapsed into her arms, and the words spilled out of me in broken gasps. The perfect smiles that had felt so false, the manicured garden that had hidden something rotten, the way that poor boy had been treated, and worst of all, Dylan's cold silence, his easy willingness to go along with it all. I told her it was over, that I had walked away, and once I started, the flood wouldn't stop. It poured out of me as if I'd been holding my breath underwater and had finally surfaced. Mom didn't interrupt. Not once. She just stroked my hair, her chin resting gently on top of my head, the same way she used to when I was a little girl and couldn't sleep after a nightmare. When my sobs finally began to slow, I whispered the truth that had been clawing at me all along, that she had been right from the start. She had seen what I stubbornly refused to see, while I had blinded myself with hope. "It was awful, Mom," I managed, my voice breaking again. "I couldn't stay there. Not for one more minute." She guided me into the kitchen with that quiet steadiness only a mother has, sat me down at the old wooden table, and set a steaming mug of mint tea in front of me. Then she slid over a slice of my favorite pie, as if she had known I'd come home needing exactly that comfort. Her eyes held mine, soft yet unwavering, and she said, "My heart knew, sweetheart. It felt the darkness in him, but listen closely. I'm proud of you. You walked away when it mattered most." Sitting there, my palms warming against the mug, the scent of pie drifting up like a memory of childhood, I realized something I hadn't before. Sometimes strength doesn't live in holding on, but in finding the courage to let go. Her voice from that night still lingers with me, clear as if she were saying it now. She told me she admired my resolve, that I had found the strength to end everything in a single moment, the instant I recognized cruelty for what it was. She reminded me that protecting my conscience, my dignity, and my sense of right and wrong would always matter more than clinging to a dream that was never meant to be. She said the only thing that counts is kindness, that a man's true worth shows in how he treats others, not in how he builds his image, and that someone like Dylan, with a family like his, was not a prize, but a weight I'd been lucky enough to drop. As her words sank in, I felt something lift from my chest, a heaviness I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for weeks. I wiped the last of my tears, nodding slowly, understanding that what she gave me wasn't just comfort, it was truth. We stayed there for hours, sipping tea, tasting pie, drifting in and out of talk, both serious and light. And in that quiet kitchen I felt wrapped in a kind of love that asked nothing of me but to be myself, a love that had been steady, unwavering, and mine all along. That evening, something shifted deep inside me. I hadn't only walked away from Dylan and everything his family stood for, I had taken a step back toward myself. For so long, I thought love meant holding on, even when it hurt, but I understood now that the safety and care I was searching for weren't things to wrestle out of people who refused to give them. They had always been right there across from me, in my mother's steady eyes, in the way she held my hand without judgment, in the quiet reminder that I was already enough. And as I went to bed that night, my heart calmer than it had been in months, I felt a certainty I hadn't known before. Someday, yes, I would find love again, but this time it would be with someone whose goodness wasn't a performance, someone whose kindness wasn't conditional. I no longer felt rushed because for the very first time, I knew exactly what I was looking for. If this story touched you in some way, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, Leave me a comment about what you felt while listening, maybe even share a similar moment from your own life, and give this video a like. It means more than you know, and it helps me keep bringing you stories that remind us we're not alone in what we've lived through.